I've had a lot of people who struggle with making bread. Now, bread is something I've been attempting to master for a long time, and I've tried enough recipes to find out what works well and what doesn't work well, so I'm here today to show you what works. Now, one of the things that I've noticed with a lot of breads is that, especially with whole wheat bread, it's really hard to get 100% whole wheat loaf of bread that is soft, doesn't get all hard within a couple hours after baking it, lasts for a long time, and tastes really good. And so that's what I'm going to try to do. I found a recipe that works really well from King Arthur flour, and it was a recipe for white bread, and I took it and adapted it to use 100% whole wheat flour. My husband doesn't tolerate white flour very well, and so when I bake, which I love to do, sometimes it bothers his stomach and he doesn't like to eat it, and so I don't get a chance to bake as much as I'd like to because I want to bake things that he can eat and that he'll enjoy. So that's why I took the King Arthur flour recipe for the all-purpose flour dough, and I adapted it to turn it into whole wheat. So this is my version of the King Arthur recipe, and this is a non-knead dough, so it's super simple, and believe it or not, it's non-fat. There's no oil or fat in this dough. So let me show you what I do. I don't really like the color and the taste of some of the whole wheat flours, but I do think that the King Arthur white wheat flour works pretty well for this recipe, so that's what I'm using. So what I'm going to do is, notice I'm dipping my measuring cup in the flour several times just to kind of aerate it. I've got a whole heaping cup here, and I'm just going to take my finger and just level it off. I'm not packing it in at all. I'm going to do that for each cup that I get. I don't want to pack it. We're going to do 3 1/4, 3 1/2 cups of flour for this recipe. I've got 3 cups there, and then that's about 1/4. This is not precise. You kind of just have to follow basic guidelines, and if you're not sure, do 3 cups. Skip the 1/4 of a cup. The 1/4 of a cup is not going to matter much in this. The next thing I'm going to do is add a teaspoon of salt. And I've got an adjustable spoon here that changes measurements. And again, this is not exact. You kind of want a heaping teaspoon because whole wheat bread needs extra flavor to it to give you a good taste. Otherwise it gets kind of bland. The other thing I'm going to add to this, one thing that's pretty important to add, because whole wheat flour needs some sweetness to make it taste good. Otherwise it gets too bogged down in that wheat flavor. So you can put honey, you can do regular granulated sugar. I've done that before. You can do brown sugar. Honey is really, really good, but molasses adds a really, really nice flavor. So I've got a slotted spoon here, and I'm not, again, being very precise. I'm just kind of pouring some in. I probably put 1/4 of a cup in there. If you want to measure it, I would say put 1/4 of a cup. If you make this recipe and it's too sweet for you, definitely make less, put less in next time. Okay, so I've got about 1/4 of a cup of molasses in there, and now I need yeast. So I buy bread machine yeast in the jar because I bake a lot and it's convenient to keep it in the freezer in this format. I don't like the little envelopes of yeast that fly everywhere when you try to open just one of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 2 1/4 teaspoons. This says that 1 package of yeast in the yeast in the little packages is equivalent to 2 1/4 teaspoons of this. My measuring spoon doesn't have 1/4 teaspoon, so I'm just going to do 2 1/2 teaspoons. Like I said, none of this is super, super precise. It's just, if you're a little over, it's okay. If you're a little under, it's okay. You learn by doing it. Once you do it, you learn what you can adjust on, what you can add more to and take away from. I'm going to stir this yeast in just briefly, not very important. And then I've got a mason jar here. I like to measure in mason jars. I've got 2 cups in this. I'm going to add 1 cup of this water, and I'm going to stir it in. I find, since I adapted this recipe, that 1 cup of water is usually not enough to make a dough. Now, you can see I've got most of this water mixed in. It's hard to stir. It's clumpy. It's not coming together into a dough. So I'm going to go ahead and probably add almost all the rest of this water and see what that looks like. This is a no-knead dough. So basically all you're doing is stirring this water in to make kind of a batter type consistency. If you've ever made biscuits, you want it to be about that type of consistency. Drop biscuit dough is a little looser than a roll biscuit dough. You want it to be that kind of consistency. Certainly not as thick as a normal dough that you would do. You won't be able to stick your hand in here and handle it. Okay, so that looks good, but I still think it needs a little more water. So I'm just going to add the rest of that water, which ended up being about 1 3/4 to 2 cups of water. Okay, so that's what it looks like right now. It's gloppy, it falls off the spoon when I lift it up. It's definitely very liquidy. I could not knead this at this point by hand without a lot of flour. It's not dough that you would bake with right now. So this is what this looks like. It smells delicious, but again, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ingredients. Whole wheat flour, 100% whole wheat flour, molasses, salt, yeast, and water. Very simple and non-fat. No added oil or fat added to this recipe. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to get all of this off the spoon. I'm going to scrape the sides down, and then I'll have to get it off the spoon again. I'm going to cover this with plastic wrap. There's no need to grease the top of this. It's so wet that it's not going to form a skin. I'm going to cover this with a good tight-fitting plastic wrap, and then with a towel to keep it nice and warm. And I'm going to set this to the side for 2 hours. After 2 hours, I'll come back and show you what we're going to do next with this. Okay, so this dough sat covered for 2 hours, and one of the things that you can do to help speed the process along is I sometimes will take it over to my stove burner. I'll set it on the stove burner. I'll turn the burner on for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds, turn it off, and that heats the burner up just enough to where it's warm. I can still touch it, but it kind of gives a little bit of heat to this dough because we didn't heat anything up. We just did everything cold, and that gets the yeast started if you add some heat to it while it's proofing. Not enough to cook anything, just enough to warm it up slightly. But anyway, this has been sitting for 2 hours, covered with a towel and plastic wrap, and this is what it looks like. It's bubbly, it's still very liquidy. I don't want to mess with it too much, but I just kind of want to show you what it's sticky. It sticks to my finger when I touch it. It's at this stage what I would call a sponge. It's not ready for baking yet. So what we're going to do is keep it covered, keep a towel on it, and it's going to go into the refrigerator for 2 hours or overnight. Overnight is great with this, but I don't always get a chance to start dough in the evening. So if you have 2 hours, that will work. So that's what we're doing today. It's going to go in the fridge for 2 hours, and we'll be back when that's done. Okay, so now that I've made my 3 loaves, I've got them all sitting on floured parchment paper. I'm just going to take I've got a serrated steak knife here. It doesn't really matter what kind of knife you use. I'm just going to cut some X's in the top of this just for design. You can do whatever you want. If you have any of the fancy bread cutting tools that make pretty designs on the top of bread, you can do what you want. Sometimes you can make 2 parallel lines. That works too. or you cannot cut it at all. However you want to do it is fine. Okay. Now that I've cut in mine to the top of that, I'm just going to take flour and sprinkle flour all over the top of this, and that is going to keep this from having the skin form on top of it. And again, as I said all along, we're not greasing anything. We haven't sprayed it with any cooking oil or spray. We're just doing the loaves just as they are with no fat or added oil. So now I'm going to cover this one with the overlapping parchment. Use my hand towel that I've been using all along. I'm going to cover this. I'm going to let this sit until the loaves are about doubled, and then I'm going to put them in a hot oven, probably about 400 degrees, and I'm going to bake them until they are done. And I'll show you how to determine that they're done after they're cooked. Okay, so these came out of the oven probably about 15 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago. They have to sit for a few minutes before you can start cutting into them. I cut into one a little too early, and the texture gets a little gummy if you cut into them too early. So let it sit for 10 minutes. I just couldn't resist, so I had to cut into it and eat some of it. But this other one has rested for a little while, and you see the texture is nice. They're squishy. It's got a little bit of a crust on it. It's not hard. It's not overly crusty. If you like yours more crusty, you can bake it longer. I like mine a little softer. So I'll let these sit longer before I slice into them and eat any more of them. But they turn out really well. And they'll be soft for 4 or 5 days. You'll be able to eat them for 4 or 5 days. They won't get hard and crusty and chunky where you can't eat them at all after a day. And there's no fat or oil in these. Makes 3 nice loaves. It's a great recipe. So if you're interested in trying this on your own, I hope you really do, because it's a great recipe and a great way to get started on a healthier diet with 100% whole wheat flour. It's going to give you a nice healthy loaf of bread that also tastes good. So thanks for watching. Be sure to click like down below and subscribe, and I'll be making more videos hopefully for you in the future. In the meantime, I hope you have fun trying to make your own loaf of whole wheat bread.